Welcome. This is Barbara Van Allen, president of the club, and we will get started in a little less than a minute. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the 627th meeting of the Economic Club of New York, and this is our 114th year. Seems like we've done half of those meetings just in the last 2 years, but I'm John Williams. I'm the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and I'm chair of the club. So as many of you know, the Economic Club of New York is the nation's leading nonpartisan forum for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. And our mission is as important today as ever as we continue to bring people together as a catalyst for civil conversation and innovation. So a special welcome to members of the Economic Club of New York's 2021 class of fellows. It's a select group of diverse, rising next-gen business thought leaders, as well as students from the City University of New York Graduate Center and the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham University. Now, it's really a pleasure for me now to welcome our special guests today, Reshma Saujani and Tim Allen. So Reshma is a leading activist and the founder of Girls Who Code and the Marshall Plan for Moms, and she's a trustee here at the club. She spent more than a decade building movements to fight for women and girls' economic empowerment, working to close the gender gap in the tech sector, and most recently, advocating for policy supports to support moms impacted by the pandemic. Tim Allen is the CEO of Care.com, a 15-year veteran of media and technology company IAC, and Tim raised his hand to lead Care when it was acquired by IAC in 2020. And prior to that, Tim was CEO of IAC's Mosaic Group, and during his tenure played a pivotal role shaping the early days of well-known brands like Vimeo and Ask.com. Now, today's program will be a conversation, and I'm very fortunate to be a moderator. Any questions that were submitted to the club, they were shared with me in advance. And we'll end promptly at 2 p.m. And as a reminder, this conversation's on the record as we do have media on the line. So first of all, welcome Reshma and Tim to our conversation today.
Thank you.
Yes. And so, you know, I talk to business leaders and community leaders all the time. You know, clearly in my role, I'm following the economy, the labor market very closely. And the number one topic on the labor market today is really around themes around labor supply and issues around labor force participation, especially among women during the pandemic period of time when there's record numbers of job openings, but a lot of businesses and other organizations are finding it hard to fill those jobs. And we're also hearing about what's people are calling the Great Resignation. So I really want to start from there. This is the Economic Club of New York, and thinking about our economy, what's happening out there in terms of labor supply, in terms of labor force participation, and these waves of retirements and people leaving their jobs. And how do you think, how do you think about what's driving that? So Reshma, I'll start with you. To what extent do you think can these developments really related to COVID or aspects of the broader state of the economy?
Well, I think when it comes to women, COVID played a huge impact. At the beginning of 2020, women made up 51% of the labor force. And we lost over 9 months, 30 years of progress, and our participation was back where it was in 1989. So women didn't just leave the workforce, they were pushed out. And they were pushed out for, a handful of reasons. First, when schools shut down, many working mothers relied on schools to provide childcare, quite frankly. And so when schools shut down and daycare centers were shut and they couldn't invite their parent to come in and care for them because they were afraid that they could get sick, working moms either had to reduce their hours, quit their job, move into their car, or in with their parents. Secondly, childcare in this country has always been unaffordable. The United States has, makes the least amount of investment in childcare. So during those moments, moms just simply couldn't afford to pay for childcare. And then, finally, as you know, many women were in jobs that weren't pandemic proof, in education, retail, healthcare, especially low-income women of color. And, 70% of Black women in this country are not only, the single breadwinners, but, the single caretakers. So when they lose their job, the entire family has suffered. Unfortunately, 2 years later, not much has changed. 50% of daycare centers still remain shut. Childcare is way too expensive, and we have a supply problem there. Schools are still, unstable. We haven't retrained women to go back into jobs that no longer exist. And you see this playing out in the latest jobs report. that came out on Friday, where 309,000 women left the workforce and 184,000 men entered it. And so we, as Tim talks about, have this enormous opportunity, not just for government to act, which I think some of us are having less and less, faith that that's actually going to happen, but for the private sector to really step up and lead and to help women re-enter the workforce in ways that were, quite frankly, are just more healthier and more tenable, to the commitments that they want to make to their families.
Perfect. Tim, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. I would say, it's interesting. We're in this epoch and era of time where there's more flexibility in the workplace than ever before. But that has become a have and have nots moment, right? As Reshma mentions, women have the flexibility, but they're also taking on more at home. They're taking more on the silent labor hours. They're taking more on their own shoulders. So they're left with this, what I will call untenable, dire choice to be made. Do I tend to my family? Do I tend to my job? Do I tend to my aging parents? How do I regulate and how do I actually shift all of my attention and all of my focus in order to have it all? And what needs to happen is actually employers need to become more flexible. I know it sounds a little bit archaic in the system of where we're providing flexibility to work from home, but what they have to do is actually provide supplemental benefits so that women can actually have the support structures that are necessary and that are there. Now, the big issue we're facing that you mentioned and kicked it off with is we're facing real supply issues. We're facing issues where there is not enough childcare in America of quality and affordability and accessibility, to be frank, that allows women to actually be able to participate in the workforce. Meaning, for example, childcare deserts were there prior to the pandemic. They had always been there, right? But it was mostly relegated to some rural areas and to some of the pockets of the country that were not necessarily more urban. You're starting to see now daycare centers aren't opening back up or capacity is being met. And what's actually interesting for the first time ever is daycares are now just as costly as in-home childcare. So it's becoming less affordable for families, and particularly families with low-income households and those that are predominantly female-led and women of color. So you have this domino effect that's occurring in society from an economic perspective, from a supply perspective, but then it's also what's happening is what always happens in our country is women are shouldering that burden. So what we need to do is actually step in from a private sector perspective, provide supplemental benefits, provide a livable wage for our caregivers that are out there in the community. And this is going to take the government and the private sector locking arms in order for us to make a material difference over time.
So both of you have highlighted that these issues predated the pandemic, but perhaps the pandemic has put a spotlight on them in, as you said, Reshma, right now, in terms of a lot of daycare centers haven't reopened. And so the problem is even more severe. So a lot of these solutions really just aren't about right now, but really about how do we, on a sustained basis, create a strong foundation for the labor force. Before we get to some of those issues, I think really where we're going to go with this conversation, what about other things you're hearing from people right now, beyond the ones that we've talked about, concerns about COVID, lack of childcare, the uncertainties around schools. And a lot of people talked a few months ago, well, once schools reopen, that solves the problem. But of course, there's always a chance that the schools will close again. What else are you hearing from people do you think is important that's holding back labor supply right now?
Look, I think that people are not going back to the old world. I mean, I think about it for me, CEO Girls Who Code, I had my first child, I may have saw him 45 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. And I didn't see him crawl. I didn't see him take his first steps. I never did nighttime or fed a meal to him during the work week. And then when I had my second child, I had him during COVID. And I did all those things. And I kind of said to myself, I cannot believe I was living that way, right? And so I think for a lot of parents in particular, they're not going back to barely seeing their children or not being able to take them to school or not being home for bath time. So I think we want to manage our life to work, right. But, we want to basically be able to, work to live, right? It's like there's different things that are important to people today. And so I think they're shopping. I think we're looking for who's the employer that's actually going to allow me to have these things. Because I know when I have these things, I'm going to live longer. I'm going to be more productive. I'm going to be a better corporate citizen, quite frankly. And so I think that is really underlying so much of this.
Yeah. I can't support that enough, by the way. And I would say it's mothers and fathers. I'm hearing a lot of fathers also saying that as well. They're going, I wasn't taking I'm a good example of that, right? I wasn't taking my 6-year-olds to school at kindergarten when they first started. Now I'm taking them every day as they go to school. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. It's like the most joyous part of my day, even as they're kicking and screaming and don't want to get their backpack on, right? Like I will trade that in any moment. So I have that moment with them, right? And Reshma's right. People are shopping. People are looking around and saying, how can I have this flexible benefit, but also be able to be employed and have a career that's successful and not be mitigated to having no forward progression in my career? It's all happening. And it's funny. You mentioned, parents were saying during the pandemic, when kids go back to school, it'll go back to normality. I think parents have also woken up to, we are still living in an agricultural age. Like the hours of school are not tailored to an employment factor, right? The fact that we're at an 8 a.m. to a 2 p.m. and then you have to figure out what to do with your kids after school, and you have to negotiate, you have to figure, you have to get an after school program or a grandparent or a babysitter or a nanny, parents are going, wait, that doesn't work. Like, hold on. My job doesn't end at 2 p.m. My job ends at 6 p.m. or I need to be on a Zoom call, or now I've got, non-contiguous blocks I need to be scheduling. So I think people are just waking up and going, wait, what works for me, what works for my family, and what works for an employer? And it goes in that priority order over time. So I completely agree with what Reshma was saying.
And caring about those things doesn't make me less ambitious.
Yes.
It doesn't make me less committed, right,
Yes.
to my job. Quite frankly, makes it just more practical for me and my family and my health.
Right.
And I think that those things really matter.
Yeah. And to your point, it makes the employee more loyal, and it makes them more of a productive employee. And it makes it, I'm sure everyone who's participating in the meeting today doesn't turn off their iPhone at exactly 4:45 p.m., right? Like whether I get the work done at 9:45, 7:45, 11:45, I'm getting the work done, right? Because we have the personalities to do that, and we have the commitment and the whole thing. And that is what more and more people are subscribing to. They're going, look, I will be there when I need to be there. I will be there and show and perform, and I'm going to be an incredible employee, but I don't want to miss these moments.
So what if you, Reshma, you said people are shopping around. Tim, you made similar comments. People are looking for this. I mean, as employers, a lot of, at the Economic Club in New York, where, people are thinking, well, okay, so people want these things, but what is it they want? And what, because we want to make sure that, we're being an employer of choice, personally at the New York Fed, but more generally. So what is it they're looking for? What are some of the key components of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with taking a hard left from doing what many companies have been doing, which is like digging their heels in and being, you must return to work 5 days a week, right? So we got to back away from that. And now that a lot of companies have, changed the timeline again to January, I think everyone needs to sit back and say, okay, how do I structure this workforce? So one, we did a survey of, 1,000 working moms and asked them what they wanted. It was pretty clear. So the first thing was about flexibility. Flexibility for salaried workers, predictability for hourly workers, right? So if you're a salaried worker, you want to be able to pick up your kids from school. You want to be able to take your kids to school in the morning. So let me determine and have control and choice over what works best for me, and don't give me grief about it. And I think for salaried workers that work in retail, like, don't sign me up for a shift at 7 and then I've already gotten childcare and then I show up for my shift and you've changed it on me. Like, give me some predictability about my life, which helps me with my logistics and managing my life. And these two things should be very, quite frankly, easy, right? And able. I think, again, for a lot of working moms, the other thing I'm hearing is get rid of the motherhood penalty. For so long, when we talk about the pay gap, in the United States, it's not between childless moms and women and men, it's between fathers and mothers. And so we go into a lot of judgment when women have children in terms of their commitment to the job. And suddenly, if you're a mom, you're less committed, you're less focused. But if you're dad, let me hire the guy from Little League. And so that discrimination, needs to really change. I think a lot of, again, the United States is one of the few nations that doesn't provide paid leave. Many companies still don't provide sick days and paid leave, and the ability to stay home, take care of a family member when they're sick. We need to start putting those types of benefits. And then finally, as we've said, companies got to subsidize childcare. Like, if you're going to pay me, you're going to pay for me to freeze my eggs, can you please pay for my childcare? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I really do think that, like, again, we've talked about this, all the studies show we would never get rid of K through 12 education, but all the studies show that 0 through 4 is critical. So companies investing in that next generation, putting money back into their employees to help them pay for childcare is a worthy investment, not only in their employee base, but in our country.
I mean, Reshma and I were talking about this prior to the start of the meeting, which is we did a survey of over 1,000 HR executives, and only 19% of them offer childcare benefits and some kind of subsidy. That is just, I truly believe, and I'm predictive in this, and of course I have a bias in this as well, but I think over time, childcare benefits, and not only childcare benefits, I would also say senior care benefits, because in the sandwich generation, parents are getting pulled in both directions of taking care of their parents and also taking care of their children. And what's going to end up happening is private sector is going to need to step in, and it's going to become an akin benefit for those employees of choice, those that they want to recruit, to healthcare, to dental, to what you see in a normal package of benefits that's going to happen. And it doesn't have to be overly expensive. A small subsidy of daycare, a small subsidy of in-home care. What we offer is ubiquity of care over at care.com in our enterprise product. And we say, look, let the employees make a choice, because inevitably with employees, some go, well, I don't have kids, but I have a dog, right? Or I don't have it, and I have it. And so everyone tries to make everyone in, same foot equality. Well, we say, good, give them a stipend, give them a subsidy, give them something that they can apply to their lives that actually amplify and benefit their life to make them a more productive employee. There is one other thing I think corporations are going to have to evolve into within the benefit sector as well. It's going to be from an employee perspective. It's moving from what I will call performative to effectiveness. And I say this, and it's controversial. And what I mean is, a lot of people have policies on paper. A lot of people say that they have these things, but they don't necessarily encourage or actually demonstrate from the executive levels the utilization of said benefits. And so I'll give really good examples, right? Employees want to see and have representation where people are taking maternity and paternity leave. They want to see that it's not just lip service on bereavement and time off, that actually when something happens in their household, they have the flexibility to actually go and use that time. A lot of fathers, and it's a lesson I hard learned from myself, a lot of fathers take a limited amount of paternity, right? And so in our company, we have people who show up to meetings, and look, I run care.com, so it's not lost on me that like, of course I get the luxury of doing this, and a lot of companies don't. But I would say organizations have to take a hard line. And in our company, what we do is, if a father, we know it's a new father, comes into a meeting and they're not done with their paternity leave, we say, it's so great to see you. How is the baby? You don't need to be here. And it has to start to be in the chambers of the executive echelon for people to actually push into their organizations that these are effective policies that people can really take advantage of, not just on paper, not just there in terms of checking a box and making you a more attractive employer. And I would say through COVID, people are starting to recognize that.
Yeah, I want to build on that. So it's such a powerful and important point. 70% of American dads take less than 10 days off when they have a child. And, we know a lot of our companies here in New York City in finance, they, again, want to hire the guy that's a dad and that teaches Little League. But when he takes paternity leave, we're like, oh, whoa, wait a minute here. And so I think you're absolutely right. I don't think you get the, most innovative company award for applauding your paid leave program unless you can show how many men took it.
Yeah.
And, are you actually incentivizing it? Are you tying it to performance? Are you tying it to a performance review? And I think why that is so critical. I mean, my big aha, as an activist, as a CEO, as a leader in this moment was that we have been focused so much in the corporate workplace on equality in the workplace that we didn't realize that the only way we get equality in the workplace is if we have equality at home. 86% of that unpaid labor is still done by women. And so you're never going to, lean into your job if you just don't have the time.
Yeah.
And so I think if companies can actually start putting forth policies like the one we just talked about that will help change that ratio at home, we're going to get to equality in the workplace much faster.
Completely agree. I completely agree. I mean, you look at nations such as Norway and Switzerland that have some of the most progressive family policies from a governmental perspective. And even they are not quite at the 50-50 silent paid labor hours between men and women. It is going to take a complete landscape shift for us to do this. And it starts with private sector encouraging fathers. To Reshma's point, I subscribe 100%. I'm fully on board. That's it.
So I'm curious, you talked about employers changing, kind of not only some of the policies, but, the flexibility. Reshma, you mentioned that. I mean, has the pandemic maybe taught or should have taught leaders that, trusting people to work remotely, not necessarily have to be in the office, being watched all the time, that people can be productive, or the way I always put it, that we should be measured by the outcomes that we achieve rather than the inputs that we put in terms of the number of hours of the office. Should this be one of those moments where, leaders say, this actually does all the things that you said. It makes people more productive, be able to balance all the things in their lives, and implement that. And I have a follow-up because, we're moving to a flexible approach here. And a lot of people aren't quite sure what that is. And I think that's another question I would have for both of you. Like, how do you define that for people so that it doesn't become working? And Tim, you actually did this. It doesn't mean that I'm working until 11:45 at night. and it really means that I have flexibility, but I'm still, working a normal number of hours.
I mean, look, I think all studies show that workers are more productive than ever before. I mean, all you have to do is look at the stock market. So I'm not sure that this has ever been really about productivity, but just really, it's hard to shift people's behavior and then have them bring, and people go back to not easily go back. So I think that's why there's this push of a come back, because it's this fear of the unknown. But I don't think it's about productivity, and I think that that's clear. But you do raise, there is no harm. There's not any harm in working remotely. We know that people are more stressed out, they're more anxious, they're less connected in some ways, and so we have to really think about design very carefully. I've been thinking about this again in my work at Marshall Plan for Moms. If all the moms opt to work from work remotely and all the dads go back to the office, well, guess what? They're having that water cooler conversation, and we're kind of back here on Zoom. When we don't all immediately already have great technology, we're out of the conversation. And so I think we have to be very thoughtful about design, and how we don't create second-class workers. And so again, I think we're spending so much time on resisting what is inevitable rather than thinking about what to build. And I'd like for that shift to happen soon.
Yeah. I think, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So no one knew what they were doing in a lot of ways, right? The technology companies had a leg up because they had the digital capabilities and the virtual capabilities in order to have the pandemic and be able to have a workforce that was continuing to be productive. I would say a lot of people adapted very quickly. And what that could show is the ingenuity and the innovation that occurs inside of our private sector every single day. And you look at it, and there's certain sectors that will never be able to go remote, right? Retail workers, fast food workers, they will never be able to. But I think a lot of companies are going, great, so how do we ensure that they're getting the same capabilities, to Reshma's point, not necessarily, they're not second-class citizens. They are getting similar benefits, similar capabilities of flexibility. We're able to be more dynamic with them. I think it's causing a rethink. And so I look at this right now, and everyone says to me, like in a lot of the other IC companies, we go, what does flexibility mean? What does it actually look like? And I love the word that Reshma's using, which is by design. I also use a word called, it is today an experiment. We are all experimenting. We are all going to figure out what works and doesn't work. No one is going to hit the nail on the head, as you've seen from the reversion of most major companies that were like, we're going full force back in. And now they're going, wait, we're not going full force back in because we have a revolution on our hands, right? Like, everyone's experimenting. And for us to pretend it's anything other than an experiment at this moment in time and we haven't figured out is foolish. Like, no one has this figured out. But what we could do as a collective is be able to share the data, look at the information, see the productivity, and go, what actually works for my workforce? And it's also going to be customized and tailored to the workforce, right? It's not going to be a one size fits all. It's not going to be Amazon going back to the office, Facebook going back and following each other. This isn't an arms race. This is a race for what is best for your employee group, what is best for your team members, and define what's flexibility, what's best for your company. And so for us, what we're doing is a hybrid model of a hub and spoke. We let people come into offices when they so choose, but we also let them work remotely when they so choose. And we set them up for success. That's our experiment right now. And we've also told very transparently to every employee, we reserve the right to change, right? We reserve the right to pivot and move, because you can't get locked into what flexibility is defined as in a very temporal moment of time.
So we're going to talk a lot about childcare in a moment and come back to that issue. But before we do, I know one thing that I think both of you have mentioned that, and we've definitely experienced, is that it's not just childcare is a huge part of it, but there's also taking care of other family members, parents, or others, but also the mental health aspects of that. And we've definitely seen a lot of expanding offerings to employees when they work remotely and have been working remotely around that. So how do you think of all the pieces of the puzzle? And we'll get in more depth around the childcare particular issue, but I don't know, how do you think about making as employers' roles and making sure that especially in a remote kind of environment, that they're providing a full set of kind of support for employees?
I would say the drumbeat of today is childcare, as you mentioned, and we'll get deeper into it. The latent, silent, underneath current that no one is really acknowledging, but is sitting there, is senior care for most adults inside of a workplace. And I would say to you, what I grapple with every day at work, what I actually grapple with personally as well, is because I have aging parents about 1,000 miles away from me. Plus I've got my kids that I'm also dealing with, meaning that I'm trying to figure out and find the configuration is, with 86%, as Reshma mentioned, 86% of silent labor hours falling on women, it is taking its toll. You bring up mental health, and that is the one that I find myself losing sleep about at night. Right? Like there is a crisis happening in America that is silent, and it is occurring because the stress and the anxiety of a normal pandemic that would be occurring and figuring out yourself, and then having to figure out, what do you do with your aging parents when people can't enter the household, but they need to have medicine administered to them? What do you do when you have a caregiver we had a companion who was going to go see my mother 3 times a week, and she couldn't enter the house anymore. So for my mother to get just the basic necessities of groceries, because she couldn't go and actually purchase the groceries herself because she can't drive anymore, it became highly stressful for me. And I don't even take on the majority of silent labor hours in my household. And so I go, if this is a burden to me, what is occurring in your workforce for all of those who are having to pick up not only the responsibilities of work, being the most productive that we've seen in society yet, as Reshma has mentioned, but also how do you take care of your parents? How do you take care of your kids? It really is going to constitute a crisis. And I do think, and by the way, we're seeing it from corporations. So a lot of companies work with us on their benefits plans and what they do from a child care and senior care perspective. They're coming and saying, we really need to have senior care benefits available to our employees and our constituents. But they're also saying to us, we're really concerned about mental health benefits. We're really concerned. Employee assistance programs of yesteryear were not effective. It was an 800 number. No one called it. People were like, oh, I guess I have this resource. They're becoming more proactive about saying, how do we actually get the intervention, the points of infliction that we're actually noticing within employee groups? How do we proactively reach out to them to let them know that they are here, we are here, they've got the resource? And how do we intervene with mental health benefits, not just therapists, because when people hear mental health benefits, they think therapists, but also the intervention benefits of mothers, a mother group, community groups can make a huge difference in your office, like a huge difference. We have tons of data and tons of data and studies that show that groups of mothers who correlate together and actually discuss what it's like being a mom, working, or having to take care of an aging parent increases productivity and satisfaction by close to 70%. Like there's huge things that can be done inside the HR suite of these organizations in order to make sure that it is a life stage conversation, not just a one aspect conversation of either childcare or work. So I would say though, that's what's happening in the hallways and the things that we're seeing and hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you saying that, because they say like almost, 86% of women at the age of 45 in the workforce are moms. And so a lot of women are like me. I'm 45. I have a 1-year-old, a 6-year-old, and 2 parents that are 76 and 73. And, last year I was trying to take care of my kids, and then like constantly on, the CVS website trying to sign up my parents for the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And so most of the reality of women that you see in the workforce that are around, that are around my age are living that reality. And it's untenable. And I think it is hard, it is hard to talk about these things because you already face a penalty in the workforce. It's hard to raise your hand and say, yes, I am suffering from, depression and anxiety, even though at the start of the pandemic, 1 out of 7 moms were, and now it's 7 out of 10. And so again, these benefits of paid leave, mental health days, just having the time to say, I need a minute, I think is really important. Also, I surveyed my moms and my PTA, and I'm like, did any of you get a memo from your employer saying, what do you need?
Yeah.
And I think in this moment, just to be seen and recognized and almost applauded and praised, about what kind of mothers did for not just our children, but our parents, over the past year and a half. I think so many mothers are can you just see me, and everything I've been through and what I'm doing, and just please help me just a little bit. And so I do think that conversation is really, and it makes me happy, John, you were saying that a lot of people are talking about this that you talked to, and I'm like, finally, thank you. Like, because sometimes you feel like you're screaming into the vortex.
Yeah.
So let's turn to the big issue of childcare, where we started, and kind of a big part of this. So we've talked a little bit about the U.S. is kind of an outlier in terms of provision of childcare. We've talked about the shortage of providers right now. So why don't we just go? I know, Reshma, you could start maybe on this. It's just kind of talk about the kind of what you think are the biggest issues here, and we're going to get to the discussions about what can we do about it. But how do you see childcare issues really being hindering people being able to effectively enter the workforce and achieve their economic potential?
Yeah, it's just too expensive. My parents came here as refugees, and my dad couldn't afford the $50 a week for childcare. And so from the time I was my son's age, 6 or 7, I was a latchkey kid. And so a lot of parents are being asked to make untenable choices. I mean, you have moms today that, again, have to go to work, can't afford childcare, are leaving their kids home alone, and they're getting arrested. And so we've got to make childcare, again, affordable in this country. And again, prioritize it in society in the same way that we prioritize public education. Secondly, we got to realize, that we pay parking attendants more than we pay childcare workers. And so we value our cars more than we value the people that are caring for our kids. And I think a lot of the women in this industry are saying no. And so, we've got to provide, a living wage, for those who work in the childcare industry, and start valuing that work. And again, it's why we don't value the unpaid work that women do in the home, because we don't value care. And I think it's not just important to solve this crisis, but I know there's a lot of conversation about the fact that, we have the lowest rate of men participating in the workforce, in the history of our nation. Well, part of the reason why that's happening is because a lot of the jobs that are open are in care. But we've created this culture, in this American culture, that men don't do care. And so it benefits all of us to uplift care and its reverence, in our society.
Yeah. We often say the economy does not work without care. Right? You've seen this through the pandemic, right? You've seen we've had all the stats. We've been talking about the numbers. We've talked about the workforce exit. It doesn't work if you don't have care as the backbone. And Reshma is exactly right. If we're not paying our caregivers a livable wage, there are so many other opportunities available to them that we are going to have a crisis that will just be protracted and will continue on for a long period of time without there actually being any kind of intervention actually to bring tax benefits to families in order to really pay above board and pay above the table. A lot of caregivers actually looked at this and said they love their job. They love the work. It's meaningful for them. But a lot of caregivers also said, I didn't have unemployment benefits because I was beginning paid cash when the crisis hit, when the pandemic hit. And now they're looking and saying, I'm not doing that again, right? I'm not taking that risk. I'm not taking that chance. I need to have a career that actually will invest in me as much as we invest in them. And so caregivers are definitely an investment point that we need to lift up. And I agree 100% with what Reshma said. I think the other thing that we just really need to take a look at is the societal benefits that happen to children and actually happen to fathers when we start to invest in childcare and allow them to take participation in there and participate in the upbringing of their children. Men have significantly lower death rate. They have significantly lower heart attack rates. They have significantly lower stress when they're active participants in their children's lives. And they're not having to go to work and spend, John, to what we talked about, like endless hours from 8 a.m. until 11 p.m., having to be in front of a computer and having to actually show FaceTime. When they get to be an active participant in their children's lives, they actually have better quality of life over time. And so do the children. Children actually, when they start to see gender neutral roles occur inside of the home, actually have a more positive, favorable view of men taking on caregiving responsibility. This is a generational impact. This is something that we are investing today for future generations of tomorrow. And this is what it's going to take in order to get gender equality and neutrality inside of the home, right? Sons need to see fathers playing this role so that they feel enabled and empowered to play this role in their future. It's funny. Girls in the household actually become more, they take on more jobs. They become more employable outside the home when they start to see their mothers work. They actually want to mirror. Representation matters inside of the household. And so I really do think that from a societal investment perspective, we need to be investing in the kids in terms of having early intervention childcare. Test scores, crime rate goes down, test scores skyrocket, crime rate goes down. There's a number of studies out there. And so I actually think for society as a whole, we have an once in a lifetime opportunity to really make a difference here.
So Tim, I'm going to come back to you on this because, I want to hear more about what care.com does in this world and how you in the space and how your company's been adapting to the pandemic and all these issues that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so we acquired care.com approximately 3 weeks before the full force pandemic hit. So I could tell everyone out there, don't do that if you have the chance. We had already been locked in and signed the deal. But it's been a great acquisition for IC. We're really excited about it. And here's really where we've been focused. We've been focused on those two pillars of affordability and accessibility. We view ourselves as a platform of choice. We are agnostic as to the type of care. We want families to come and actually be guided towards finding the type of care that they need for their particular household. As we've always said, and we were talking about earlier, care is a very individualized need. It's not one size fits all. I have a son who has autism, and so he needs special care in terms of what he goes to for after school, right? So what we actually look for inside of the platform is we start to guide and we start to question parents. We start to get to their specific care needs. And then we look to match them. We look to match them with daycares. We look to match them with in-home providers. We look to match them with group activities that they actually would participate in, after school programs. We're really agnostic about the provider and type of care as long as it meets the safety and the quality standards that we set. And we also just think that this is going to drive accessibility, but also affordability. Affordability, what Reshma said, is one of the most important things that we're focused on in today's society. When parents have to make this dire choice of employment or their household or food or, all of the things that they would like to put on the table, and childcare happens to be right now for the average middle income household, 31% of their take home pay. That is not sustainable if they have to. That's not sustainable. You can't dedicate 31% of your household income, your combined household income for 2 kids in order to just have care, to then go to work to pay the 31% in order to have the child. It's like, it makes no sense. And so what we think is free marketplace dynamics is going to really open up more affordability over time, but that is going to take investment in the caregiving community from a government perspective. You talked about policy a little earlier, John, and I want to say one thing, which is it's a little bit of my soapbox. So everyone, please forgive me. The fact that we're the only developed nation that continues to not have a paid family leave act it's astounding to me. It is astounding to me. And I am sure the hypermajority of employers that are sitting out on this call today and part of this conversation of the Economic Council provide maternity and paternity leaves. But the fact that there is just a hypermajority of small businesses that cannot actually provide maternity leave because the government hasn't intervened and said, we're going to make it sustainable for you as a small business in order to provide this benefit. We are the only developed country not to have this. This is ludicrous at this point in time. And the fact that I am going to say that is one of the most exciting and progressive pieces of the Build Back Better program, it's sad because it should just be table stakes. It should just be something that we've already conquered and gone past. So look, I know you asked about care. I apologize. I had to make my plug there for that. But I have to tell you, like, from a policy perspective, I can't let that one slide by ever because, it's just crazy to me. But I will say at care.com, we're big advocates for this. We're big advocates for government programs that will actually put dollars back in families' pockets. We think that there's better tax programs that are out there. We believe that there should be portability, as similar to an FSA, that you could actually, but not FSA tied to your employer. We think there should be portability with a child care dependent savings program that you can take from employer to employer, or even take with you if you're not employed. And then you should be able to deploy those dollars towards a plethora of care services that are out there. So we're big advocates across the landscape on that as well.
I want on that issue, we're talking about the supply of labor into the industry too, and about the care industry in general. I mean, this has been an issue, Reshma, what you said has been an issue for decades. And my wife is in nursing, and there's been a nursing shortage her entire career, which goes back to the early 90s. And how do we? I'm curious. How do we? We've talked a little bit about this, but how do we really shift mindsets around what rewarding, meaningful, stable careers are? I mean, I always go to the nursing example. So one I know the most is like, this is an incredibly rewarding career. It's an incredibly important one. It pays well. It's got a lot of opportunities, a lot of growth. And yet there's a lot of people who don't think, well, that's not the kind of thing I want to do for some of the reasons you said. But how do we change mindsets around the labor force, given that this is such a priority for our economy to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to why I spent a lot of time pushing girls to go into coding. President Obama said, like, the last jobs to go will be the humans telling the computers what to do, and that's true. And what's also the future of the workforce is care. You see that in everything. So look, I think it does start with our little boys. I have 2 sons, and I think we have to be very thoughtful every single day about how we, again, elevate care as a respectable and dignified job. And part of why that's so important is I think the dads or the men in their lives have to model that. And so a lot of that starts at home. And, for a lot of women, we were stuck in our houses with our partners, and they saw us doing the laundry and the dishes and doing the cooking and cleaning, and it didn't shift anything. You still started the pandemic with 86% of women doing the work, the labor, and ended it the same. And it's not just the United States, it's India, it's, in Africa, it's, wherever you go, it's almost the same ratio. So part of that is just because that work is not valued. And so I do think, the child tax credit, again, so these ideas of, allowances and paternity allowances, valuing that unpaid, like literally putting a dollar amount on that unpaid labor is really critical to valuing that labor. And then we just got a lot of work to do kind of culturally. The images that you see on television, the images that you see in magazines, how we portray mothers versus fathers and the things that they're actually doing, and elevate them, not for, Instagram performing, right? But actually say that this is what it means to be in America, to be a great dad, And so I think that there's a lot of work that we have to do. In the Philippines, they did this whole PSA campaign that laundry is love. And it was this whole initiative that they had in the country to get men to do more laundry. And it worked, And so we need to really start thinking about these kind of creative ways, I think, to push it, because again, those are the jobs that are open. And, we need them to be filled. And we need to have, again, talented, loving young men who want to do that work.
Okay, so I said we were going to hold the policy to the end. Both of you jumped into the policy because, of course, that's the really important part of this. And before we continue on what are the public policy, we talked a bit about employer policy, but about public policy. This is a macro and a microeconomic, a social, a cultural issue, all intertwined. But right now, it's such a macro issue. we still have 5 million fewer people working today than before the pandemic. And part of it seems to be the challenges of getting people back into the labor force, especially women and mothers and dads, and as part of that. So this is a huge issue, was before, but right now, like, how do we get our economy back to full strength and really create opportunities for everybody? So I'll toss the mic to you, Tim, first. What do you think are I'll ask a very specific, what do you think are based on the evidence we've seen either in the US or in other countries, or whatever you point to, what do you think are the most effective ways to address the issues we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes? And so Tim, I'll ask you to start, and Reshma, go next.
Yeah, I mentioned it a little earlier in the conversation, which is if you look at the Nordic countries, what they end up doing is they actually really incentivize employers to ensure that paternity and maternity is taken. And then they also give subsidies in terms of ensuring that there's the equal amount of pay, equal amount of labor, equal amount of actual job functionality for mothers to come back into as they enter back into the workforce. They have a ton of societal and structural programs, including, the subsidy of their daycare centers, the subsidy of their in-home childcare. But it's really about taking all of those different societal programs and bringing them out into the forefront and saying, look, we're going to force participation in a lot of ways. We're going to force that you're going to take the maternity and the paternity, and employers, you're going to be the regulators of that. We're going to enforce the fact that you're going to have access to childcare, and the government's going to take on the responsibility of that. So I'd say that those structural programs have really been the most impactful that we've seen from an economic and from a study perspective as well, right? Especially in workforce participation. You see a lot more moms in the Nordic countries continuing to re-enter the workforce, participate in the workforce, and feel emboldened to actually be part of the workforce. I think this is going to be a slow, progressive conversation in American society over time. What I actually love is Marshall Plan for Moms. I love programs that say put dollars back in the pockets of mothers. And trust me, Reshma didn't pay me to say this, and Reshma and I have talked about this a ton of times. I'm actually a big advocate for it because I think that you have to go all the way out to say, look, we do need to be paying for silent labor hours. We do need to put a dollar value against the work that is being done. And in order for moms to get that recognition and actually feel valued, and by the way, also get the opportunity of flexibility in our economy where they go, look, employer A, you're not going to respect that. I'm getting paid for the mom duties. Great. That gives me some leverage in terms of going to employer B. It really does start to put economic means in the pockets of the mothers to actually participate and participate in full gusto. Let me put it that way. I think those policies are there. But as I just mentioned, I won't go back on my soapbox, we are still grappling with the basics of the policies that are inside the Build Back Better program, right? The fact that we're paid family leave, the fact that we're trying to get childcare subsidized to some point in a tax incentive, these are just small concessions that need to happen. And by the way, are by no means a slam dunk getting through. So the fact that we're not able to get out of that, I do think that we have to take the policies, and corporations specifically have to fight for the policies to go, hey, government, we will take our responsibility, but you all need to step up and actually help us in terms of ensuring that the point we talked about earlier, small businesses have the ability to provide maternity leave. These businesses really need to band together and say, hey, we want the policies, we'll advocate for the policies, we will participate in the policies, but there has to be a shared joint effort inside of all of this. So I look at that spectrum. I think if you look at developed nations, that's really what has been successful over time. They have 30 years plus data. And I think that America has to get off the bench in a lot of ways on these policies.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, right now, we're just having the wrong conversation in Washington. The cost of bailing out Delta Airlines is exactly the cost of what subsidizing childcare would be. Yet one is viewed as, an unearned benefit to American parents that, people don't want to pay for. And so that to me is a values problem, that we have to actually shift. Because again, the United States is the only one who says, nope, you got a kid, that's your problem. You solve it. It's your individual problem. It's not my responsibility as government. It's not my responsibility as your employer. And so, again, that's a values thing I think that has to shift. The policy, the levers, again, we are never going to go back to where we were January 1st, 2020 in terms of women's labor market participation unless you pull these three levers, which is the child tax credit, subsidizing childcare, and getting paid leave done. And so as much recovery as we want will be determined by what we are willing to actually invest in it. And I think, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of faith that this is going to happen. And Tim, just as we were speaking, they just wrote that they're trying to pull out paid leave as we speak. And so I really do think that a lot of the work that I know I'm going to do as an activist is really pushing the private sector to kind of stand up and fill in the gaps. Because if we don't, we're never going to make up that loss that we've made with women's labor market participation, especially for women of color.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to add one other thing, which is, Reshma and I talk to a lot of the same people, but, I've been talking to the paid leave of the United States advocacy group. It is truly, and this isn't hyperbolic, if we don't pass paid leave this time, it is truly going to be another generation before this happens. And that is just not palatable. That's just not palatable in our society. So, I encourage everyone who's on this call, if you're a private business, please galvanize yourselves, stand up, talk to your representatives. Like, this is something that if it does not happen in this bill, it will be another 50 to 100 years before it actually gets through.
So I want to come back to something Reshma just said about, and both of you said about the role of employers, whether larger businesses or small ones. This is a time when labor markets are, reportedly very tight. Job openings are really high. Every employer I talk to in this district or this region or anywhere, it's hard to fill jobs. Isn't this a time where employers are going to have a lot of incentive to figure out ways to bring people back into the labor force, to retain people who are thinking like, hey, this isn't working for me? Isn't this also a time beyond the political issues to really be, that employers are ready to think about how can I address my problems that I can't staff my organization?
Yeah, and especially if you are smart, this is a talent race. You have a lot of, very talented people that are sitting on the sidelines and that are kind of waiting and watching. When PwC announced that, hey, everybody's going to work remotely, like, I swear to God, I had like 5 friends who just went and applied. So it is really, it's real. I think people are kind of waiting to see. So I think that this is just an opportunity, a once in a lifetime opportunity to really, again, like, get very talented people to come in and work for you. I've seen technology companies do this with engineers forever. They've had engineers who've had deals to, work remotely, for as long as I know, because they were going to move their policies towards what their most talented people wanted. And it is the same, I think, opportunity to do that. And I think what people are saying is very clear. Give me flexibility, give me choice and control over my life, support me if I'm a caretaker, and with that burden of that expense, especially in this moment where there is a care desert and there aren't a lot of, there's not a lot of opportunity for me out there. There's, the supply issues. And so I think a lot of this stuff is it's not rocket science.
Go ahead.
John, all I was going to say, and it's been there. And I would just say, finally, and it's unfortunate the pandemic had to bring this to the forefront of the conversation, but finally we're having the conversation, and especially in employer ranks, that go, okay, how do I actually subsidize the full life, not just what I used to have as the wall of work life, right? And that didn't exist. It was always a facade, right? It was always going to be your life. And so finally we're having a conversation of, great, how can I help moms get back in the workforce? How can I make sure women are feeling empowered and having all of the support and access they need in terms of being successful, not just within the walls of my building, but outside in the office as well? And men, right? Like, finally, companies are having conversations going, no, you need to go take your paternity. You need to be home and sharing the silent labor hours. You need to be able to participate in all this. It's going to take that conversation, and we're going to actually have to apply it in practicality that says, look, here's the policies, here's the thing we have to do. And to Reshma's point, employers of choice are going to win that. Employers of choice are going to actually nail that. They're going to actually show that. We get a lot of people showing up to our doorstep. They're going, my employer is not offering flexibility. My employer is not a family-friendly employer. My employer expects me to work until 2 a.m. and be putting together spreadsheets and doing all that stuff. And I go, cool, come on. Like, I want your talents. I want your skill. And in this labor market, it's going to continue to be in that direction.
Yeah, and I think it's like we just have to decouple ambition and hard work from the desire to live a healthy life.
Mhm.
And I think for so long, in like again, rugged American capitalism never decoupled those two. And we have to, because we just had a global pandemic that just showed us that like life is, you may just have this one and you want to live it well.
Okay, so this has been well, I'll give you one last, Tim, one last comment before we wrap up, and Reshma, one last word from you, although that was a very good last word, actually. I don't know how you're going to beat that.
I might just, yeah, I think
Okay.
I'm done. Oh,
Yeah, I think you got it there. Tim, you're up.
All I'll say is this is deeply personal to me. It's funny. Reshma and I talked about her parents in the past and coming from immigrants and being a latchkey kid. I am the son of a single mother who was a ER nurse who would work flexible hours according to the deal. It would work archaic hours, right, into the wee hours of the night, where I was home a lot of the time. And I would watch my mom struggle to figure out what neighbor or what family member or someone in the community who could actually come help take care of me. And when I was a child, and it was really like what would have been possible for her if there was an infrastructure in place of care, if she had the support, the subsidies that were there, that can be there today in private sector and private employment. And I go, this is our opportunity. This is our once in a lifetime opportunity. This is the moment when private sector can step in, align themselves with the government, and really be a force of change for future generations. And the future generations are going to demand it.
Right. Well, terrific. I was very much looking forward to this conversation. They're really important issues. Like I said, these are big issues for our macro economy. They're issues really for our local economies, in the New York area, but they're issues for all of our families and businesses and our society. I'm glad we had this conversation. I do think, Tim, something you said as an employer is absolutely right. As we go forward, we are all experimenting, with these flexible or however you think about them approaches, and experimenting from learning from the pandemic, because we've seen a lot of things that we never saw before. I've seen your workforce do things that you never imagined that it would work as well as it did, and also learn things that don't work as well as you would think. So we have to apply that, figure it out, apply and learn from this. But I do think, again, this issue of how do we address these issues, whether childcare, parental care, all the other issues too, and really have an economy that's based on having work and life and everything fit together and like Reshma had said, this is going to help us be more productive, not less productive. So these are really important conversations. I'm looking forward to continuing this in the future, but we're out of time now. So I'm going to thank both of you for participating today, and then turn to what the events that we have coming up. So I'm pleased to report we've got many prominent speakers lined up for this fall. And as always, we encourage you to invite guests to our events. On October 18th, we have a member-only discussion on global foreign policy developments focused on China, Afghanistan, Australia. We then have on October 21st, the Honorable Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce. And then we have a member-only discussion on the 26th on managing to horizon risks such as climate change and decentralized payments. And then on the 28th, we have the Honorable Christopher Wray, the Director of the FBI. And then on November 4th, we have Bob Solentic, President and CEO of CBRE, and Mason Morfitt, the partner CEO and CIO of Value Act Capital. And they're going to discuss ESG and climate change. So if you joined as a guest and would like to become a member, please email the club at the address on the screen. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our 338 members of the Centennial Society joining us today, as their contributions continue to be the financial backbone of support for the club and help enable us to offer a wonderful and diverse programming, both now and in the future. So thank you again. Stay healthy, stay safe. We hope to see you at our next webinar.